Hey guys, how's it going? Jam here, and welcome to my first video on the full Forza Motorsport 7 game for the pilot episode of the Track Build Battles series. As this is the pilot episode, it's not going to follow the same format as most of the episodes that you'll see in the future, as this one is just sort of setting up the series. So whereas every future episode will have a head-to-head sort of a battle, as the title suggests, between two similar cars to see which of them can go fastest, and then of course there'll also be an overall leaderboard to see which car is the fastest overall once the cars are built up to the certain specifications which I'm just about to tell you about, and once I tell you about the track as well, because obviously we need a track to try them all out. The first car that I'm going to use is this Mercedes A45 AMG, a favourite car of mine. This paint job in particular is rather special to me. And yeah, let's go into the upgrade shop so I can tell you all about the regulations that these cars need to meet in order to race in this series. We go into the upgrade shop, and I've already realised that I've messed up because I've left it built up. So I'm going to reset all the default upgrades and I'm going to rebuild it for you while I commentate over from start to finish. So first of all, we're going to build from right to left. So we're going to go into the conversions first. Now, engines. This car's standard engine is pretty decent, to be fair. We're going to completely ignore the restrictions that are on there. Is there any... Okay, we'll just look at that. Throughout the series, we're going to use the stock engines of any car if we can. If not, if it needs more horsepower to get to the top of A class, which is where we're going to be doing it to, then that is what I'll do. But as I said, this Mercedes is a pretty decent engine and I can get to the top of A class easy. So yes, I probably should have mentioned that a minute ago, but all the cars in this series will be built to A700. And the other conversion option that we have here, though, is the drivetrain. And every car in this series is going to be rear-wheel drive swapped. Most good track cars are rear-wheel drive, so that kind of makes sense. Obviously, there are exceptions. A lot of high-end stuff is four-wheel drive. A lot of the lower-end stuff is front-wheel drive, like the likes of the Civic are fantastic. But for this series, and because I like rear-wheel drive, we're going rear-wheel drive. Now, the other conversion option that we have is aspiration swaps. I don't currently have one for this car's engine at the moment. I think it's it's automatically turboed from stock. That's something we're not worrying about. Some cars we might add aspiration to, some cars we might not. Just depends on the engine and the build. The next slot along is the aero, and for this series, as it's a track car series, we're going to be going with full race aero. So yeah. Nice and simple one there. If there's other body kit options available, I'll probably use them. I'm not quite sure. Again, it's not something I'm going to be strict with. That might change on a car-to-car basis. So next up are the tyres. And again, unsurprisingly, we've got to run race compound tyres, as they're going to be racing around a track in a track car build series. So yeah, that kind of makes sense to me. Tyre widths, I'm probably not going to change. I'm sorry. I will change depending on the build. Again, that's going to be completely unrestricted. Rims, I'll probably mostly leave the stock rims on the car, but again, that's not something that's going to be restricted. In the drivetrain, there are going to be no restrictions whatsoever. I will always go for a diff though, because it doesn't add anything, and it means I can tune it, and we'll get on to tuning a bit later on. I will normally go for a race gearbox if I can, but again, as I said, that's completely unrestricted, and I can run anything I like. The final actual restriction for this series is going to be having a race roll cage. As it's a race car, it needs to have certain safety aspects to it, so we're going to have a roll cage. So that's pretty much it for the restricted parts. We've got to have race aero, we've got to have race slicks, and we've got to have a race roll cage. And the rest of the car is just going to be built up however I see fit, really. My first port of call will normally be race brakes. That should also fit on most cars in this series, and again, we'll be tuning those to my personal preference, which I'll get onto later. So we're going to stick those on the car as well, and as you can see, we're still only at the top of B class. So as this is the first episode, I'll carry on building this car in this live com format and do it live for you. But for the rest of the series, with doing 2 cars an episode, it will probably be not built. I don't know if I'm going to build it on screen. I still haven't quite decided yet. I haven't done a normal episode, as it were. I haven't prepared one yet, at least. So I don't know quite how it's going to go. I might put them on screen and just fast forward it up and do a little commentary over it later. But as you can see, I've just gone and put all of the race handling parts on. That's going to be pretty standard in this series. I am going to go and have the race gearbox, as I mentioned. We're going to go for race tyres, I think, because... Well, race tyres? We're already on race tyres. I'm going to go for max width tyres just to give me lots of grip. As you'll find out soon, that grip will be rather important. I do know I haven't told you the track yet. Don't worry, we'll get to that. And then, obviously, with the last sort of 35 PI that we've got to play with, I'm going to just add lots of lovely power. Just 10 PI to go now. That's not going to work. This is... Oh, that works absolutely perfectly. That's nice. So we're going to have just over 400 horsepower on race compound tyres with 275 widths and weighing in at just over £2,500. What are the odds that we can squeeze on? Nope, we can't squeeze on a flywheel. The other options we can normally have a chance at. We can have a clutch, which will save us £5, but we can't quite have the driveline, so we will go and have the clutch. So that is this car built up. So if we back out of the upgrade shop, I think I actually built it slightly differently than it was before anyway. So, but I haven't pre-prepared the laps or anything, so that doesn't matter. So now we've done the upgrades, I'm going to go into the tuning. Now, because of the restrictions of this series, if I pick a car that is already like starting in A class, I might not get all the tunable parts on the car. So I'm going to be doing very, very minimal tuning in this series. I'm not going to touch the tyres, I'm not going to touch the gears, I'm not going to touch the suspension or the roll bars or springs or dampers or anything like that. I'm not going to touch the downforce, even though that's a mandatory part. I'm just going to leave it stock. We're going to get to the brakes though. As I mentioned earlier, I am going to put the brakes to my personal preference, which is simply going up to 150% pressure. I kind of overshot there a little bit. I'm going to leave the brake balance at 50-50, and then when it comes to the diff, this is the most important bit. Every car will be able to have a race diff because it makes no difference to the PI or any of the stats at all. And as you can see, it's important with cars that don't start rear-wheel drive. Because it's been converted, the diff messes up for some reason. I do not want to be running 100% acceleration diff, and I definitely don't want a 75% deceleration diff. So every car in this series is going to be running a 60% acceleration diff and a 20% deceleration diff. That's my go-to standard settings for when I'm tuning a base tune for a car, and that it's a pretty standard setup really, and I'll be doing that for all cars regardless of whether they start rear-wheel drive or not. So that's it. I'm going to be changing my brake pressure, I'm going to be changing my differential. Also, while I'm here, that bleeding more information thing that pops up in the top right, like, it obscures the thing. If anyone knows, it annoys me. If anyone knows how to get rid of it, please let me know in the comments. So that is it for the car build. But before we take it onto the track, which I will be doing in free play, I need to tell you which track we're going to. And it'd be quite nice if we had a benchmark time to chase down as well, even though this is the first car. So let's go and do that. So here we are, loading up the replay of the laps I've already done to start this series off. As you can see, I was driving the Aston Martin Vantage GT12, I believe it's called, and we're going to be racing around the Suzuka West alternate layout, which is a track I've become very, very fond of after racing it early on in this game's life cycle. This Aston Martin starts just above A class. It starts at S class 710 PI, so it's a mere 10 PI over the limit. And as I'm doing a track build series, I thought it would be nice to use a already track prepared car as the benchmark. So it's going to be it starts. Sorry, I'm prone to stuttering like that. I'm awful, aren't I? It's going to be a difficult challenge to beat this car, because, as I said, it starts above S class already. Oh, sorry, it starts above A class in S class already, but it is only 10 PI, and this is my first car going round this track. So I'm probably going to learn the track in the future and gradually get quicker, as I go for a little bit of a drift there, coming out of the nasty chicane. So, but anyway, yeah, this is the target for all the cars to beat. It's a very nice car, I must admit. I did do a lot of laps learning this track, and I do very much like it. I really do. And the car is very nice as well. It was a little bit annoying having to get into Tier 4 to unlock it, because I was only Tier 3 when I decided to use it. But anyway, that is the first lap around this track in this car. So let's go and ride on board for a quick one. So here we are, approaching the start of a hot lap at this Suzuka West alternate layout. Crossing the start-finish line there, going under the Dunlop Bridge and heading down to the very famous 130R, one of the fastest corners in the... Well, is it one of the fastest corners in the world? I think it might be in Formula 1. I should probably have done some prior research. And then as we dive under the brakes to a heavy braking zone into turn 2, it's a very tight right-hander, followed by another very tight right-hander soon after, which I completely missed the apex of. And we completely miss out the start-finish straight and the S's, which is what makes this layout the West layout. Then we head into the Degner two Degners. I really should have picked a lap to ride on board with, so I completely missed the completely cut the apex of the first Degner, and then ran wide through the second Degner. Then we go up the hill, kink right, hard under brakes for a very tight left-hand hairpin, trying to get as close to the apex as possible, and it's very tricky putting the power down as we ride across the curb on the exit into another braking zone for the alternate chicane, which is what makes this the alternate layout, which is a very tricky chicane. As you can see there, getting a little bit of grass on the exit, getting a bit of slide out as well. And then as we come round this very long, fast right section into the final corner, which is the spoon hairpin, it's a very tricky corner because it's a very long hairpin, which is almost a double left-hander. As you can see, getting on the curb on the exit quite nicely on the inside, not running wide on the exit, and that's one lap as we come under the Panasonic Bridge and across the line for a fast lap at this track. So now the benchmark has been set, let's move on to the Merc. Now let's find out how the Mercedes compares to the Aston Martin. I think what I'm going to do throughout this series is show you that sort of small bit of the loading screen as we load into the replay, and I've done all the laps beforehand just so I can concentrate a bit more. I don't really like driving while I'm talking. It's an acquired skill. And then we'll watch through the opening lap in the car, and then we'll probably maybe a lap and a bit of from the start of the replay, and then we'll go and watch the fastest lap as well. I'm tempted to try messing around with overlays once I get into the series, so when we do have two cars lapping around the track in the battles, I might try and put them side by side or above and below or up in each corner or something and put them side by side. But for now, as it's just the one car, you've obviously got it on your full screen, if you're watching on full screen, that is. If not, it'll just be the full size of the player that you're watching. Anyway, that's pretty irrelevant. So, on to the Mercedes. How was it? Interesting is the word I'd use. Quite typical of the car that I expected it to be, really. It's short wheelbase, high grip, and rear-wheel drive swaps. So you bet it was twitchy, and also understeering, which is an interesting mix. It was surprisingly stable through the high-speed corners, through 130R especially. It was very planted, very balanced, as I say, very stable, very nice. So that was nice. But then you get to the two right-handers. Actually, you know, I'll wait for my sort of little explanation and wait for the replay to catch up with me. Going through 130R, very nice. And then we get to these two very tight right-handers. The brakes weren't as good as I was hoping they'd be, and it was rather twitchy through the very slow corners. The turn-in grip is phenomenal. But then, as you can see there, getting on the power, not so easy. It doesn't... I still got an annoying little bit on the replay there. Through the Degners, it was mostly okay. It didn't really like running on the curbs too much. As you can see there, I'm probably trying to avoid them quite a lot. But on the exit curb, it's not too bad. Coming up to the very tight hairpin, again, it's the same sort of story. The turning grip is fantastic. But then once I try and get on the power, as you can see, I was incredibly cautious on the throttle coming out of there. And then into this corner, it's exactly the same story again. Lots of front end grip, but this time on the exit, not too bad. So it was twitchy, but quite stable, And also quite understeery, especially through Spoon. I think that might just be a characteristic of Spoon, though. Everything seems to want to understeer through Spoon. Apart from this car, which likes to understeer, and then as you put the throttle down, obviously it oversteers. Yeah, so this car, very, very interesting to drive. But how fast was it? I don't really know. So let's move on to the quick lap to find out. So, starting the fastest lap that I managed to set in this Mercedes. I'm all of a sudden realised that I'm not sure what to really say through this bit of the commentary, because I described how it was handling around the lap in the previous lap. Again, when I've got two cars going up against each other, I can talk more about how they compare, and like both through statistical stuff, through the Forza stats, the horsepower, the weight, etc., the tyre size or whatever. But again, I can also talk about how the cars compared on the track. Was one more oversteery, one more understeery, did one quicker in a straight line, one slower in a straight line, one more grip, etc, etc, etc. This Mercedes, I can't really talk about that because you've seen the build. It's pushing just over 400 horsepower. It's obviously on race tyres, 275 widths. I've talked about how it drives, so I guess I can talk briefly about how it performs, as we're already coming to the length of the lap. It's quite a short lap here, pretty much under a 1 minute 30 lap time. So that's just a bit of a ballpark figure. I think compared to the Aston Martin that I drove for the benchmark, this is a little bit slower in a straight line, and I'm not quite sure how it compares around the corners because it drives so differently. The fastest point on the track is obviously this main straight that we're onto now, and this car wasn't quite hitting 150, where the Aston was just about exceeding it. So there we go, finishing the fastest lap with some terrible commentary. So now let's move on to the times. And I've got absolutely no idea how I'm going to display them yet, so this could be interesting. In the end, I unsurprisingly decided to use my good old trusty Excel spreadsheets to display the lap times that all the cars put in. And as you can see, there's only one car on there at the moment, the Aston Martin GT12 that put in the banker, or the benchmark for all the cars to chase down, put in a 1 minute 26.8 or thereabouts. It was just a bit quicker than that, but you know, you can see it on screen for yourself. And now we're going to go for a quick flip and see how the Merc did. So it's going to be slower, unfortunately, by about half a second, which I don't think was too bad considering how lovely the Aston Martin was to drive and how interesting the Mercedes was. But anyway, that is it for this episode, this pilot episode of the Track Build Battles series. If there's any two cars you want to see me put head to head in future episodes, leave it in the comments down below, and I'll do my best to do all of your suggestions. I do already have the first episode planned though, so it won't be in the first one, but it will be at some point in the future. So thank you very much for watching this episode, and I hope to speak to you again soon. Goodbye.